This is Scott Loveridge with the North Central Regional Center for Rural Development. I'm pleased to be your moderator today for this talk on local and regional food systems in Nebraska, successes, challenges, and sustainability. And we're pleased to welcome three speakers today. Dr. Charles Francis is Professor of Agronomy at the University of Nebraska, and his areas of focus include agronomy, crop rotation, and farming systems. John Bailey is a JD, and he directs the Rural Policy Program at the Center for Rural Affairs in Lyons, Nebraska, with about 900 people, I believe that's right, John. And John joined the Center for Rural Affairs in 1998, and he's authored over 50 research briefs for the CRA that look at issues facing rural America. And finally, last but not least, is Kathie Starkweather. She's Director of the Farm and Community Program, Center for Rural Affairs. Kathie worked as a rural sociologist for USGA Natural Resource Conservation Service prior to coming to work at the Center for Rural Affairs as part of the policy program. Welcome, all three of you, and looking forward to it. Participants, if you have questions, just please put them in the chat box. We'll be watching that as the presentation goes forward, and be sure to get those answered. Go ahead, folks.
Hello, this is Chuck Francis, University of Nebraska. We're happy to participate with the Center for Rural Affairs in this webinar on local and regional food systems. Results from this Nebraska project, but we are sure this has relevance to a lot of other places in the country. There is a cast of thousands, of course, and among them are the North Central Regional Center for Rural Development. We appreciate their support, as well as the Federal State Marketing Improvement Program. This is a joint project of the university and the Center for Rural Affairs, both in Nebraska. The whole arena of rural entrepreneurship and community development are really high on the agenda of UNL and our extension outreach programs. We feel that in an era and a region that's really focused on monocultures and commodity crops with little added value, with a lot of raw materials that pass straight through the hands of the farmers and on to other folks who make money. This sort of research and information on local foods and adding value to products both on the farm and in local rural communities is just essential for the future of these communities. So urban and peri-urban food production in both rural and semi-urban areas are both important, and marketing direct are ways to get more of those food dollars to farmers. So we're proud to work with the Center for Rural Affairs on this project on local and regional food systems. Now here's Kathie Starkweather.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kathie Starkweather. I'm the Director of the Farm and Community Program at the Center for Rural Affairs. We're going to be going this afternoon a little bit through the methodology of what we found out from a series of interviews. Case studies. So what are we trying to learn? What we were trying to learn with this project is Nebraska is actually pretty far behind in terms of everybody else in the country relative to building regional food systems, but there's a growing interest. We found by working with Crossroads Resource Center out of Minnesota that Nebraskans spent a lot of money on food each year, $4.4 billion actually, and $4 billion of that leaves the country, or leaves the state of Nebraska. But to determine, what we're trying to do here, we had questions, long-term questions. How do we get more locally grown food to Nebraskans? How do we keep more of our food dollars in Nebraska and the local economy? And the last question, how are food systems being funded and sustained? So how do we get there? Well, in order to get the answer to these questions, we developed and administered a number of surveys, held focus groups, did in-depth interviews, and we developed case studies that will be up on our website, Center for Rural Affairs website and University of Nebraska's website. And out of this, we identified what we learned were the best practices from farmers, from organizations, from schools who were either providing and selling local food to direct markets or were purchasing it. Other questions, though, that we needed to find out and get answers to, are there any food system efforts that are already in place in the state, and how long have they been sustained, if they have been? Are there barriers? What are those barriers and opportunities? What's the interest in participating in both local and regional food systems in the state, from the farmer to the consumer to the institution? We're looking at all of those areas of interest, and et cetera. And then finally, what do successful systems have in common? What are those key best practices that are going to lead not only to sustainability, but how do they get the money to do it? This is just a picture of one component of a food system. It's a farmer's market. The previous picture was a picture of two young women farmers who both have red hair, as you notice, so they call themselves the Darlin Reds. And they do CSAs, they do farmers markets. They're selling to institutions and part of a cooperative that sells direct to. So local food systems in Nebraska are successes, challenges, and barriers. Here's how we did the methodology. We developed and sent out electronically 2,500 surveys. We received 375 surveys back from consumers, producers, and institutions. That's who we had surveyed. We weren't as successful getting surveys returned to us from institutions, so we made a lot of phone calls and followed up and administered those surveys over the phone, which was very helpful. We then gathered that information, analyzed it, and held 7 focus groups throughout the state, so we were sure to get every part of Nebraska. And if you're not familiar with the widespread of the state, the farther out west you get, the fewer population there is. Those areas that were farthest apart in the state as well. We also went back in after we held 5 of the focus groups and had participants from the groups that we spoke about, consumers, producers, and institutions, to find out, again, what the barriers, what the challenges, what the successes were, and then held 2 additional focus groups for Spanish-speaking individuals. Demographically, Latinos are the highest demographic shift that we've seen in Nebraska, and particularly in some areas higher than others, and those were the areas that we held the focus groups in, find out what those key issues were, maybe that were a little different than. We held in-depth interviews as finally. Took all this information and kind of compiled it, analyzed it, and then in-depth interviews and creating some case studies. So we have had 10 in-depth interviews that resulted in case studies able to access that I mentioned earlier. This is just a picture of people that we have spoken with and having them speak together about, food systems and their interest in food systems. The names on this slide and the next are the folks with whom we held the in-depth interviews. Shannon Monacure is a board member for the Nebraska Food Co-op. The Nebraska Food Co-op is an online ordering year-round farmers market type thing that people can go in and order the food they want, and then there's a distribution center or system that the Food Co-op has. Linda Truscott is the food service director at one of our public high schools. Dr. John Skrita is the principal at, the superintendent at that same school, and very innovative and very, very committed to local foods. Lynette and Aaron are both farmers, one in a larger town, one in a smaller town. I'll try to speak a little louder. The other case studies that we did, we interviewed the new dean of the Nebraska College of Technical Agriculture at Curtis. They're doing some very unique and innovative things there. Caleb Pollard started a brewery out in a smaller town in the western part of the state. And then we interviewed Cindy and Harold, and I'll tell you a little bit about the work that Harold is doing, and also Natalie Kingston with Public Health Solutions. If you take a look at this picture, that is a veteran beginning farmer who raises chickens and raises eggs for them. And it's almost a 3-inch egg, which is pretty remarkable.
That was the egg.
Yeah, down on the right-hand bottom.
There's the egg.
There's the egg. Okay, so what we learned from these interviews, we found that the overarching issues that kept the development of regional food system moving forward quickly was lack of leadership. And by that, we're talking about lack of leadership, not so much locally, because there is an appetite for local leadership, as I'll point out with the one individual we spoke with, Harold Stone in Davenport. He has tried to start an entire food hub in this very small town of about 400 people, but it's got like a 4-county reach that adds up to about 25,000. So there is local leadership, but there's not much appetite for leadership with of local food and regional food movement in the state. So we're trying to definitely capacity time, making sure that there's a constant supply of food. That's what we found was a real concern for schools and for institutions. And then what are the farmers supposed to do? Are they supposed to scale up now to meet the demand, or are they supposed to, try to scale up after the demand is there, because you can't prepare for that unless you know that it's there. So that's been an issue. Communication between producers, consumers, and institutions is lacking. So those networks aren't there. Infrastructure, having the appropriate equipment, transportation, distribution, processing, those all are behind where they should be to have a successful. And then, of course, always the money to start up an expansion, and that's a picture of kids at we're very involved in farm to school, getting locally grown food into the mouths and hands of kids in our school systems. And these kids were trying some local food at lunch and loved it. So in our interviews that we held, we found that there were particular ways that institutions and or farmers were able to fund their work. Contributors to food systems included farmers, and they participate in farm to school programs, big on diversifying where they're working. So participating in farm to school programs, even though that in and of itself is not a great individual source of income unless you're growing lots of food for a farm to school. Diversifying their customer base, doing things that were not only farm to school, but also tapping into those urban markets. And in Nebraska, the urban markets in our largest two cities in the state, Omaha and Lincoln, is growing rapidly. And so trying to tap into that, the foundation that they've built to help them reach those out to rural towns. And then they've also expanded their sales to direct market sales into institution sales. And there's been a lot more community supported ag developed, which is the acronym for that is CSAs. And so we're seeing all of these components as part of funding stream. This is a picture of part of a food system piece. It's a hoop house that allows this particular family farm, very small family farm, is growing food in the winter right now to be able to do that with the hoop house. We found out that there were best practices among those 10 interviewees that we held. We learned that there were several things that were consistent among them in terms of creating a piece of a regional food system, maybe not the whole thing, but creating part of it and being able to sustain it. One thing was community involvement, making sure that the community knows what they're doing, that they are there. For example, I'll give you a couple of examples. We talked about Scratchtown Brewery, and Scratchtown has made outstanding use of social media and kept social media in front of everyone. So they are not now only in Ord, Nebraska, but they have branched out and they've been invited, and PR did a story on them and all kinds of things like that. And the community is very involved in hoping to see success. Marketing, again, that comes back a little bit to the social media piece, and I would say that the majority of what we're seeing with younger people who we interviewed is doing lots and lots of social media. Some of the people who've been around for a while growing food or distributing food don't rely quite as much on social media, but they still heavily market. And maybe that's, you know, just sending out flyers or mouth-to-mouth, word of mouth, developing local farmers markets, some way to expand their own local food. And then they've been very aware and cognizant of helping each other, you know, get partnering with other organizations. I'll go back to Scratchtown Brewery. They are purchasing a lot of what they put into their beer from local release about a new partnership that they developed. We're also seeing that with other growers. If they know that there's an opportunity, they're likely to bring on additional farmers to help meet the need. And the schools are, you know, the institutions themselves are doing a very good job to market it. And if it's a local grocery store, they make sure that people know that, you know, this food, they have new local food in their market. Told us that a lot of the shoppers, a lot of the consumers will have a preference for purchasing food from a market, from a grocery store that sells local food.
Jen had a question about whether the partnership was with the local 4-H, either urban or rural. Any partnerships there?
We have had one partnership with the local 4-H, and that's the Davenport project that I mentioned. He's made it intentional where he has the 4-H come out and help the person who's involved in creating that, leading that effort of creating a local food hub, a regional food hub, excuse me, approached the 4-H folks and brought those kids onto his farm. He has a few acres in town, and had them help him grow and then sell at the farmer's market that he also created. That's the only one that I'm aware of at the moment. So we did find that there were three key funding strategies that people used. First, out of their own pockets, individually, or as a cooperative, or with partners. And we've seen that the co-op would be the Nebraska Food Co-op, and also Scratchtown Brewery is with partners. Davenport, the schools, and the individual farmers are oftentimes doing and funding that out of their own pockets. Or with some of the schools are very innovative and creating opportunities for the community to help support it, and so the community is pitching in some dollars so that they will have enough money to be able to purchase some of those local foods. That several folks also use grants. These are primarily schools who receive grants or some kind of government funding to purchase some sort of food. So that could be fresh fruit and vegetable program, for example. Or there are several farm-to-school grants that are available that some of them are utilizing. And then community support. The work at the Nebraska College of Technical Agriculture, they have really used the community, and the community is very small. It's primarily a ranch. The students raise their own livestock, so they use that livestock in the lunches that they serve, or the meals that they serve at school. Processor, local USDA certified processor that they use, actually ends up charging them a little more expensive actually to do it that way than to purchase off of a truck, but they're so committed to the community effort of this. They also started a big community garden where people are coming in, and then from there a local farmers market that has been very, very successful. CSAs allow shares to be purchased, so that's also a community supported effort, as are a number of farmers markets that are popular. And finally, everyone that we interviewed, because we wanted to look at sustainability, but this hasn't been around all that long in Nebraska, so everyone that we interviewed has been doing this work for at least 2 years and have had definitely some bumps in the road, but are still The schools and the Nebraska Food Co-op are the organizations who seem to have been, from our interviewees, involved in this work the longest. The school getting federal dollars, as I said, or Department of Defense programs, or they have written it into their budgets. And Dr. Skrita, if you recall from the people that we interviewed, as I said early on, he's very committed to the health of his students. And he has found the money. I don't know how he found the money, but he did, to make sure that they're eating good, healthy, fresh food that's produced locally. And then the Nebraska Food Cooperative derives most of their funding from the business plan, online marketing system, and pay for that, and then those I think it's been around for, man, shaking his head, yes, it's been around that long. So the next steps in Nebraska, we learned a lot from this project. We learned that we are able. There is a really good, strong possibility that we're going to be very successful in creating a state. So we pulled together a group, working group, regional food system working group of people from across the state who are very interested in this, and they're leaders. They're seen as leaders in moving this forward, or leaders who are people who have a team or working group of about 20 putting together a strategic plan on how to address it. We also recognize the fact that there was not in the state from our elected officials. So we've been able to find a couple of state senators who are very interested in supporting legislation. And then finally, because of this project in particular, we've been able to raise the awareness throughout the state and the prominence of this issue through media releases, through radio and television interviews, through getting people involved, like on the regional working for their communities, etc. There are reports that are accessible at the Center for Rural Affairs website, and you can find them there on that slide. Those two links will take you to those publications. Bailey, a colleague of mine who was not able to vocally get on this call today because some problems with his microphone, so I was pinch hitting for him and hope he did a tenth of as good of a job as John would have been able to. And then there are the contact information. There is contact information for John and for myself, phone numbers and emails. Finally, I think that this is just a picture of another small farmers market that just started last year as a result of. So are there any questions?
Well, thanks very much, Kathie, Chuck, and John and Spirit. A very nice overview. I think there are a lot of things there that folks in other regions can be using, not obviously valuable for Nebraska, but for others as well. I have a couple things to share as people are thinking about questions. One is that the regional rural development centers are partnering with the Agricultural Marketing Service, and hopefully you can see the screen I'm sharing. And actually several of the people on the line today are involved with that as well. We're collaborating on a national project to make training available for folks that want to apply for ag marketing service grants that are strengthening the local food system. And if I'm doing this correctly, you should be able to see a map with a lot of little teardrops on it, and each of those teardrops is a scheduled training that is happening. So you can go to the one in your state, or you can go to another one somewhere else if you want. So those are available. I also wanted to ask folks to please fill out the evaluation of the talk today as they're coming up with questions. And John had a comment here too, talking about some legislation that will allow same food items that can be sold in farmers markets to be sold in institutions such as schools or grocery stores without the usual institutional regulation. So that's a good model that others can be looking at as well. I did have a question for this group, and you know, you talked about funding this, and maybe I missed it. Was there anything about pricing strategies or thinking about um, what people are willing to pay for in local food? Specifically, I'm curious. You know, let's say you've got a locally grown potato and a locally grown tomato. So I'm assuming both of those things can be grown in Nebraska, you know, reasonably easily. But is there a difference in the price premium between a potato that you peel up and you know, you remove all the exterior things and boil it up versus a tomato that you might eat fresher? You know, are there certain types of products where there's a higher price premium available if it's locally grown, and in other crops maybe less so? So, you know, sweet corn versus you know, field corn, is that, you know, are they equally more valuable if they're sourced locally?
I think there's a couple of questions there. Thank you for those questions. One of the things is willingness to pay. Let me address that one right away. That was one of the questions that we asked in our survey, and most people were willing to purchase. Most people were very interested in purchasing stuff that was locally raised, as long as it was the same price or just a smidge higher. If it was double or more the amount, they, excuse me, the number of people who responded that they would still purchase food or locally grown food dropped off exponentially. Pricing strategies, it is more expensive to work with a farmer who's also going to do some processing, just because, and by processing I'm talking about peeling the potato or, you know, cutting it up into slices or something like that, because it is more work. They do it, or you know, they have somebody else do it and they contract with someone to do that. When we're working with farm to school, it's oftentimes the folks who actually work in the kitchen processing, so they're getting those that food, you know, oftentimes. But in other circumstances where anything is processed, it's going to have a little bit higher value, and there is a value-added grant actually that USDA has for people who want to, you know, do something with those tomatoes, maybe make salsa, for example. Did I answer your question?
Well, I guess you know, if you were advising a farmer which crops to focus on if they wanted to, you know, put crops onto the market there locally, would you tell them to do or her to do potatoes or tomatoes? You know, the more freshly consumed thing, or things that tend to be more processed and become an ingredient to something else. Would you tell them to focus on the things that people tend to eat with less processing?
At this point in the development of the interest in Nebraska, I would say yes, just because this whole idea of local food and getting it in some restaurants and grocery stores is relatively new. It's really gaining a lot of momentum, and so people like to see those fresh tomatoes. And you know, they at farmers markets, at CSAs, people are purchasing all of those things either as standalone or as, you know, something to put in. But what we're encouraging farmers to do as well, if they're going to be selling to various markets, to find out what that need is, so that it isn't every farmer in Nebraska, for example, raising potatoes and people want asparagus instead. So making sure that people know their markets is something that we often talk about, and perhaps trying to encourage them to work with other farmers like they're doing in the Nebraska Food Co-op. So you've got a number of farmers who are raising lots and lots of different things who can help meet.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thanks very much. That's a very helpful response. and some good tools. I'm not seeing any more questions coming through. I think John did a nice written response about the willingness to pay too. It sounds like a fairly strong proportion of the population that you surveyed is willing to pay 10% more, which seems like a realistic result that you got there based on casual observations that I've done. So that's an interesting finding. Jen is typing, so I don't know if Jen is multitasking or asking a question. Well, maybe we'll give her a second. Must have been multitasking. Okay. Well, thanks again for joining us, and this will be archived on our center website, and so people can access it later. I think there's a lot of good advice here.